Well, I've got to say here at the beginning, man, it is so cool. You guys were led in worship by a gal today that is a junior in high school, and you got announcements from a gal that's a freshman in high school. Isn't that cool? Like, man, we love what God is doing amongst the teens in our church. Pray for them this weekend as they're headed off to their winter retreat. Well, I want to start out with a question, and that's this. Who is the biggest person that you have ever been around? Now, for me, it was my dad when I was a kid, and then when I got into high school, we had this guy at our church named Scott, and Scott was 6'5". He was just a big dude, and so, I was like, if I could ever get to be as big as Scott, like I would be a big dude. And then I was at the gym one day when we were living in Dallas, Texas, and I saw a dumbbell on the floor, and it had the numbers 150 on the dumbbell, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of a cool prop there on the floor, like holding the rug down, and then I saw this massive man go over and sit on the bench, grab the dumbbell, and he started repping it with his right arm. And so I had to go introduce myself to this guy to find out if his right arm is actually truly an arm or is it just bionic in some way. Like how is this happening? He was the biggest human being I had ever been around. Well, what about a place? Like, what's the biggest place for you that you have ever been to or that you have ever seen? So for me, it is a place called Tiger Stadium. This is Tiger Stadium on a Saturday night in Baton Rouge. 102,000 people going crazy. I have been there on multiple occasions. Biggest gathering of people that I have ever been a part of. But maybe, if you haven't been to Baton Rouge, maybe you've been to Chattanooga, Tennessee. A couple months ago, my family was in Chattanooga, and we went up on this place called Lookout what? Mountain, Lookout Mountain. If you've never been to Lookout Mountain, go to Lookout Mountain. We didn't catch it on a clear day. Maybe you will, but if you catch it on a clear day, you can actually see 7 different states from this one vantage point. Now, if you haven't been to Baton Rouge or you haven't been to Chattanooga, maybe you've seen one of the oceans. Now, it's the Pacific Ocean. Maybe you've seen it from the balcony of a cruise ship or from driving by or at a hotel balcony of some sort. Well, this is the Pacific Ocean. As I mentioned, in the deepest part of the Pacific is called the Mariana Trench. And on the southern end of the Mariana Trench, it goes down to over 36,000 feet deep. I mean, simply put, we are drawn to big people, big places, big environments, big locations, big moments. And the question is, why? We're going to get to that a little bit later today. But today we're kicking off a brand new teaching series called Big, and understanding the big words of the Bible. And today we're going to focus on the word glory. And what does that mean? When you see glory in Scripture, what is God talking about? And we're going to spend most of our time in the book of Exodus. So the first book of the Bible is the book Genesis, and then the next book is the book Exodus. And in the book of Exodus, it literally means to exit. And well, exit what? And so you have God's people that at the beginning they're in bondage in Egypt and they're enslaved. But God raises up this guy named Moses, and Moses goes into Egypt and he sets God's people free. And once Moses sets them free, then they start out on a journey to head to what God called the promised land, or a land that God would give his people and take them to. But along the way, I mean, it was tough sledding for God's people. They grumbled a lot. They complained. They didn't want to fully obey God. They were kind of miserable on the journey. And the journey that should have only taken a few months ended up taking many, many years. And one of the low points is found in Exodus 32, where Moses, he's up on the mountain getting the 10 Commandments from God, and the Israelite people, they get impatient. And they say, hey, Moses isn't coming back down. What if he never comes back down? So they decide to make their own God. They pull all their gold jewelry together and they melt it down, and they make what's called a golden calf, and they begin to worship that golden calf. Crazy, right? And so Moses comes back down and he sees the equivalent of a rave going on, and he's like, all right, guys, like this isn't going to work. And he was so mad and so angry, he threw the Ten Commandments down that they broke, and it resulted in this just heartbreaking experience. And for a minute there, as I was studying this passage this week, like I became somewhat indignant of, I can't believe they did that, right? The God of the universe is their God, and here they're worshiping a false God. And then I began to think, well, you know what? Like that's not far off sometimes from my life. Is that in my life I will put people and created things in the place in my life that's only reserved for God. Now I'm sure you've never done that, but that's been the reality for me. And God sums up this time by telling Moses, hey, if y'all don't want me to go with you into the promised land, then you can just go on ahead without me. And he tells Moses, look, in fact, I'm not going to go with you, but I'll send an angel, and the angel can go with you. Now, keep in mind, don't think like Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life or Cupid. When it comes to angels, like when angels would show up in the Bible, they would invoke fear. I mean, they were mighty beings and incredible warriors. And so, I mean, for me, that would have been like, all right, cool, God, like, thank you. Like, thank you for doing that. Like, I totally understand we were disobedient. We weren't worshiping you. We became. And so thank you. Thank you for that. God is so frustrated with his people. He says in verse 3, go up to this land that flows with milk and honey. That's the promised land that he promised to give them. But I will not travel among you, for you are a stubborn and rebellious people. If I did, I would surely destroy you along the way. God is essentially saying, look, I am so mad at you right now, I can't even be around you. You ever been there? Right? Maybe it's the kids and you're like, look, I am so frustrated at you right now. I can't even, like, you've got to handle them because I can't, maybe it's your spouse. Never happened with me, honey. I love you. But I'm sure it's happened. You've been that way with me, right? Or maybe it's a boss or a coworker. Like, look, I can't even right now. I got to get away. I need some time. Like, I can't handle you right now. But God giving Moses an angel to guide his people, well, for Moses, that wasn't enough. Moses said, that's not going to work. Look what he tells God in verse 12. Moses said to God, look, you tell me lead this people, but you don't let me know whom you're going to send with me. You tell me, I know you well, and you are special to me. If I am so special to you, Moses says, let me in on your plans. That way I will continue being special to you. Don't forget, this is your people, your responsibility. I mean, do you notice here that Moses pushes back on God and he says, look, if I'm so special to you, and he doesn't even address the angel situation. He just says, look, if we're so special to you, then you need to come with us. Tell me your plans here. I want to know what you're thinking for your people if I am going to be leading them. And keep in mind, God's already told Moses, hey, I'm not going, right? I'm not going with you. And now God shifts a little bit and he tells Moses in verse 14, my presence will go with you. I'll see the journey to the end. Look, I want to say this as a quick caveat. Never, ever, ever stop praying for that which you love and people that you love. Right? Like, don't give up on people. No matter if you think they're too far gone or there's no way God's going to show up and change his mind about their fate. Like, look at this. A man after God's own heart that had God's ear kept praying and interceding and talking to God on behalf of God's people. And look what God did. God changed his mind. Well, the word presence in verse 14 that we just read, the word presence, that God says, my presence will go with you. It literally translates face. Translates face. And so when you see face, God's face and God's presence in the Old Testament, they're interchangeable words at times of God saying, look, if my face is going with you, that means my presence is going with you. And Moses responds in verse 15, where he said, if your presence doesn't take the lead here, call this trip off right now. How else will it be known that you're with me in this place, with me and your people? Are you traveling with us or not? How else will we know that we're special, I and your people, among all other people on this planet Earth? Man, I love this. I love this that Moses goes, look, how are we going to know if we're really special and we're different? Because what set the Israelite people apart from everybody else on the planet? Well, it was that the true and living God, the huge, big God of the universe, was their God. And they were his people. Moses essentially says, if you ain't going, we ain't going. We're going together. He doesn't even address that the angel was a second plan B. Why is this important? Well, I want to say this. Moses was unsatisfied with anything less than the presence of God. And maybe that'll be our heart's longing today. That as we're in the presence of God and the Holy Spirit is working in our heart, that we say, God, anything less than your full presence in my life, it's not going to work. I want you to go with me. I want you to go with me this week to work, and I want you to go with me to where I live and into my neighborhood and into my hobbies. God, your presence, I can't do it without it. Man, maybe that's a word for someone today. You see, it wasn't enough for Moses just to have the messenger of God show up. He wanted the maker of the message. Moses knew the only thing that separated them from everybody else was the face of God, was his presence. And see, Moses was the leader of God's people, but imagine if he believed his own press report. Imagine if he believed his own statistics, set over 1 million people free. Yeah, I did that, and parted the Red Sea. Yeah, I was kind of a big deal in that process, right? It was quite the miracle, right? I had a part in that, and has an audience with God. Yeah, that's kind of me, everybody, right? Moses could have pushed his own brand, but somehow he kept the right perspective. You see, not long ago, Moses would have remembered that he was a fugitive from justice, that he was just this stuttering shepherd out in the middle of nowhere, but God. But God showed up in his life and said, I've got a job for you, and I've got something that I want you to do. And look, that's every person in the room. That's every person online today, is that when God shows up, he's got a plan and a purpose for us. He has something for us to do. But that starts with his presence in our life. See, Moses knew that everything that he had accomplished in this life, everything, was a direct result of God. Look at verse 17. God said to Moses, all right, just as you say, this also I will do, for I know you well, and you are special to me. I know you, Moses. I know you by name. Look, this is huge. It shows that even though God is so big and so transcendent and so otherworldly, he's still immanent and personal and relational and real. I mean, you almost get this idea that these are two neighbors just chatting with each other over the fence. Moses is about to understand that while God sees all of Moses, Moses simply can't see all of God. So Moses prays this bold prayer in verse 18. Moses said, please let me see your what? Let me see your glory. Let me see your word, your glory. The word glory, we hear it thrown around all the time, like, oh, that was so glorious. Did you see that? Right? Or if you're an athlete, maybe you've heard a coach say at some point along the way, hey, no guts, no what? no glory. Well, the Hebrew word for glory, it's this word kavod, which literally translates weight or heavy. Now, this past week, or a couple weeks ago, I was wrestling in the living room my 7-year-old son, Titus. And I think that's just a rite of passage for fathers and sons. And I'm going to do it now because when he gets about 15, it may not happen. And so we're doing it now, and we're wrestling. And man, I'm tickling him, and I'm holding him down. And then I would kind of let up, and then he would think he could start getting the upper hand on me, and then I would kind of lean back on him and press on him, and then it was just done at that point. And for my son, you see, Titus, he learned to give it everything he has, no matter what pressure was being applied. But for me, it was a lesson in restraint, because I couldn't put all of my weight on my son for any extended period of time, because it would crush him. See, verse 18, Moses is asking God here to throw off all restraint. Everything. Show me everything, God. Well, years later, another shepherd wrote this: God's splendor, some translations say God's glory, is a tale that is told, written in the stars. Space itself speaks his story through the marvels of the heavens. His truth is on tour in the starry vault of the sky, showing his skill in creation's craftsmanship. Each day gushes out its message to the next, night by night, whispering its knowledge to all, without a sound, without a word, without a voice being heard. Yet all the world can hear its echo everywhere. Its message goes out. What a heavenly home God has set for the sun, shining in the Superdome of the sky. Now, you may wonder, like, is God a New Orleans Saints fan? And we know he is, because it's the Superdome of the, okay, all right, anyway, bad joke, right? Look, space or the heavens, they're not God's glory. They only point to God's glory. Well, every year there's an astronomy photograph of the year that gets released. And last year, this was the astronomy photograph of the year. And it was of a solar eclipse that was taken by a Chinese photographer, and he had made his way over into Tibet to snap this photo. Absolutely stunning. Kind of a close second to photograph of the year. It's called the California Nebula, and the photographer had to capture it over a series of 7 nights and put all of the pictures together to capture the full extent of this nebula. You see, when Moses says, "Show me your glory, God," he isn't saying, "Show me something like this that points to your glory," but actually show me who you really are. Show me everything. But why would Moses want this? He already has seen so much. He's seen seas being parted. He's seen bushes burned but not completely be consumed. And yet he isn't satisfied. And so oftentimes you're not satisfied and I'm not satisfied. You see, I've stood on mountaintops and I've looked out over oceans. I've been in the room when my 3 kids were born. I've flown in airplanes at 30,000 feet and 6,500 feet. I've been on safari. I've seen stunning sunrises and sunsets. And yet oftentimes I'm still not satisfied. And why is that? Why do the most amazing experiences in our life lose their luster over time? Why do they fail to deliver, and why do we want more? Well, C.S. Lewis, the great Christian apologist of the 20th century, he said, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." See, Moses realizes that this is his shot to experience everything he has ever longed for. And so what is God going to do? Well, look at verse 19. God said, I will make my goodness pass right in front of you. I'll call out the name God right before you. I'll treat well whoever I want to treat well, and I'll be kind to whomever I want to be kind. God continued, but you may not see my face. No one can see me and live. God is saying, look, Moses, I can see all of you, but you can't see all of me, but I'm going to give you a taste of me and my glory. Well, some of you might have become acquainted by now in our church with a guy named Ryan Rhodes, and Ryan is one of our keys players here in our worship crew, and just an overall incredible dad, great dude, and he does he swam in college, and so he's an accomplished swimmer, but now on the weekends a lot of times he does triathlons, and there's a great picture of him and his son after one of his triathlons. And well, last summer I knew that he was an accomplished swimmer, and so I said, hey Ryan, would you teach my kids how to swim? Like, would you give them some swim lessons? And so Ryan would get into the pool and he would show them how to do a technique, whatever that technique was, and then it was their job then to work on that technique. You see, Ryan would give them a taste of what swimming looked like, and then it was their job to practice that. But for my kids to get out and sign up for a triathlon like Ryan does and get to the swim portion of it, well, they wouldn't make it. They couldn't do it. Moses was able to experience God's goodness, but not his full glory. The weight of God would crush Moses. I like what the psalmist says in 34:8. It says, taste and see that the Lord is what? Taste and see that the Lord is good. So what does God do? Well, look at the end of chapter 33. God said, look, here's a place right beside me. Put yourself on this rock. When my glory passes by, I'll put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I've passed by. Then I'll take my hand away and you'll see my back, but you won't see my face. God says, look, I'm going to show you my goodness. I'm going to show you part of me, but I can't show you all of me. Simply imagine just for a moment what that experience must have been like for Moses. I mean, I've been around some important people in my life. I've seen some incredible works of art and heard some unbelievable musical compositions. I've been involved in some special, even sacred moments. But nothing could parallel or compare to this. Maybe this is why in Exodus 34, verse 8, it says, at once Moses fell to the ground and he worshiped. At once he fell to the ground and he worshiped. This is the correct response. In this moment, this was most likely the only response. In the presence of such greatness, what other choice do you have? It's the only choice. Recently, I followed an Instagram account called Visit North Al, A-L, and I heard it was a great follow for images and landscapes all around North Alabama. And because I've realized in the mundane, in and out daily grind of life, sometimes I just forget where I live. Anybody else there with me? Like, I just forget the beauty of where I live. And so I pulled some of the pictures off of their feed, and man, this is right here in North Alabama. Another waterfall right here in our backyard. I love this third picture, Lake Guntersville. Lake Guntersville at sunset. I mean, that's absolutely stunning. Final picture, an incredible old covered bridge. Man, we lose our wonder faster than we realize, don't we? C.S. Lewis also states and says it this way: if none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that inner longing for more, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. If that is so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or to be unthankful for these earthly blessings, and on the other, never to mistake them for something else of which they are only a kind of copy or echo or mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life to press on to that country and to help others do the same. You see, C.S. Lewis was on to something here, and that's that we should never settle for anything less than what we were created for. Never settle for anything less than what we were created for. I mean, when we try to get from something or someone that which we can only get from God, well, we are settling for less. When we are created to be in close relationship with the biggest person in the universe and to worship Him and experience His glory. And when we are in relationship with God, well, we're a part of something that's bigger than even the universe. I like what John says in John chapter 1. And we have seen His glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son. How did we now see God's glory? Well, it was in the form of a person in His Son, Jesus Christ. Look at what Paul says in Colossians chapter 1. Christ is in you, so therefore you can look forward to sharing in God's glory. It's that simple. The Holy Spirit, when we accept Jesus and the Holy Spirit enters into our life, then all of a sudden it's Christ in us, the hope, Paul says, of glory. Think about how earth-shattering that reality is. That the God of the universe, who created the Pacific Ocean and the Grand Canyon, knows you by name and knows every hair on your head. And He longs to have a personal, real relationship with you and with me. You know, when all the other glories fade, His glory remains. He is the God who lasts from glory to glory. No matter how great our experiences have been here on this earth, there is greater to come, greater moments of glory await. Well, several years ago, I interned at a church in Lexington, Kentucky, when I was in seminary on round one, getting my master's degree, and I became friends with a guy there named Brian Marshall, and Brian was head of the college ministry at this particular church. And then I left, I graduated, and then I came back with my wife for my doctorate. And when I came back, he had gotten a new job, and he was the director of the Christian Student Fellowship in Lexington, Kentucky, right in the heart of University of Kentucky's campus. And he had just grown it. Amazing things had happened. And so during that year that my wife and I were there, we would go down and help him with outreach events and help him plan different functions for the students. And part of what they would do every spring there, right in the heart of campus in their building, is they would host watch parties if the University of Kentucky men's basketball team would make the big dance, if they would make March Madness and the spring tournament for the NCAA, if they would make it, which they often did, they would watch all the games there at their ministry location. And well, in 2014, UK, they underperformed, and everybody had high expectations, and the season wasn't super great for them, but they managed to eke their way into the tournament. And then once in the tournament, they went on this incredible run, and they started beating people and beating people and beating people until they made their way all the way to the Final Four, and they played Wisconsin. And in that particular game, UK was down by a point with 4 seconds left to go. And then Aaron Harrison, a guard for the University of Kentucky, steps up and takes a shot with 4 seconds left, and he drains the shot, and they win the game. It was incredible. I'm not even a diehard UK fan, and it was a moment never to be forgotten. And, well, it became viral, the reaction of the students that were crammed into CSF, and it went all the way up, and it caught the attention of Jimmy Fallon, and, well, I'll let you see for yourself.
But to get to tonight's college basketball national championship, Kentucky won a nail-biter in the Final Four. Did you see that Kentucky shot? It all came down to a game-winning three-point attempt. It was at the end of the game. I think it was like 4 seconds left or something like that. So back in Kentucky, a bunch of fans had a viewing party, and check out how quiet they got right at the moment that shot was taken. It's really cool. That is the best. That is so...
Man, I'm kind of like Jimmy Fallon, that my favorite moment of that entire clip is the hush that fell over the students. In fact, let's roll that back and play it one more time.
Point attempt. It was at the end of the game. I think it was like 4 seconds left or something like that. So back in Kentucky, a bunch of fans had a viewing party, and check out how quiet they got right at the moment that shot was taken. It's really cool.
Right? They get really quiet. They get really quiet. And a hush falls over them. See, for us, one day, it's going to happen to all of us, that a hush is going to come over our physical bodies. And then there's going to be a moment that we're going to leave this life, and we're going to have the opportunity to see God face to face in all of his what? In all of his glory. See, people wondering, how you say, Brian, how do you know? Well, it's because there was a guy named Jesus that lived one day. About 2,000 years ago, he was a historical figure that happened in real time on this earth. And a hush fell over him, and it fell over his followers for a couple of days. But then came Sunday, and the hush was no more. And there was celebration, and there was rejoicing, and there was cheering like nothing else. Let's finish that.
That is the best.
See, after following Jesus with everything we have in this life, there's going to come a hush, but then there's going to come a moment where we enter into the throne room of heaven. And we get to throw our hands up. And the only response, like Moses, the only response is worship. That's it. Again, final thought from C.S. Lewis. He says, we do not want to merely see God's beauty. We want something else which can hardly be put into words. To be united in it, to pass into it, to receive it into ourselves, to bathe in it, to become part of it. At present, we're on the wrong side of the door. But all the leaves of the New Testament are rustling with the rumor that it shall not always be so. Someday, he says, we shall what? Get in. You say, Brian, you asked a question earlier. Why are we drawn to big people and big moments and big places? Well, it's because we worship and we serve and we were created by an incredibly big God that longs for us to have that connection with him. Stand with me.